Alright, so in this video we're going to talk about unemployment. And before we talk about unemployment, the first thing that we actually need to talk about is the labor force. So the labor force is probably the trickiest part about the way that economists define unemployment, and so we're going to spend a large chunk of this video on that. So the labor force is defined as all non-institutionalized civilians over 16 who are employed or actively seeking employment. So breaking this sentence down, we have the first thing is non-institutionalized. Means that you're not in a mental hospital, so I'm just going to write no hospital. You're not in a hospital either, but you're in no kind of health institution. So we have no hospitals, no mental institutions, no one that's in rehab. I'll put rehab here. But you get the picture. You have to be not in some kind of institution. Then civilians, so we're not talking about people that are in the army, so no one that's in the armed forces. So if you're not in a mental institution and you're not in the armed forces and you're over 16 who are employed or actively seeking employment. So you have to either be working or you have to be actively looking for employment. So another thing that's tricky is you're not unemployed if you have stopped looking for work. So let's say that let's say I quit my job and I went immediately on vacation. I am not unemployed even though I don't have a job because I'm on vacation and I'm not looking for work. I'm not actively seeking employment. And another way that you can be not in the labor force is say that I lost my job 2 years ago and at this point I'm just so sick and tired of looking for a job that I've stopped looking altogether. I am also not in the labor force because I have stopped actively seeking employment. And so once we've defined the labor force, then it's really easy to say what someone is, the definition of unemployed. So a person then is unemployed if he or she is in the labor force and not working. So if you are not employed, you are actively seeking employment, but you're not employed, and you meet all these other criteria, then you're unemployed. So let's just first talk about a couple people, just examples of whether you're unemployed or not. So we'll just say, are you unemployed with a question mark. So person one is, let's talk about a 15-year-old who just lost his job working for a frozen yogurt shop. So 15-year-old froyo. Is that person employed or unemployed? And the answer is that are they unemployed or not? They are not unemployed, and the reason is that they are not in the labor market. Not in the labor force, excuse me. So because they are not over 16, they are, even though they don't have a job, they are technically not unemployed because they are not in the labor force. So I hope that that makes sense. It's a little tricky and the wording is confusing and it's not the way that we use it in everyday life. So that's kind of the point here, is to get used to that. So what about then we have a 45-year-old, let's say that he used to work at a Ford factory. So 45-year-old Ford factory, and now robots do his job. So robots have now replaced his job, and he hasn't looked for work in 3 years. So hasn't looked for 3 years. So while this man, first, is he unemployed or is he not unemployed? And the answer is, again, he is not unemployed. Not unemployed because he is not actively seeking employment. He is not actively seeking employment. So let's do one more person. Let's say that we have a 50-year-old manager, so 50-year-old manager who got in a fight with his superior, his boss, so the manager's manager, and he quit the next day, and he is now actively looking for work. So this is your absolutely typical unemployed person. They left a job and are immediately looking for another job. They are actively seeking employment. He is over 15 or over 16, excuse me. He is non-institutionalized, even though he got in a fight with his boss. He's not in any kind of mental hospital or any kind of hospital, and he's a civilian. He's not a member of the armed forces. So he is unemployed. Alright, now we're just going to go ahead and erase all of this really quickly, and then we're going to get down to some other stuff. Hopefully those examples were clear enough to illustrate all of kind of the tricky points of the labor force distinction. And so now we're going to talk about 4 different types of unemployment. So the first one is frictional unemployment, and this is when you're just in between jobs. So let's say that I left my job on Friday and I had to wait a week to start my new job. So I left my job on the 1st of September, and then I won't start my next job until the 9th of September. So then I'm frictionally unemployed for that week. And this actually, we believe, makes up about 5% of the population. 5% of the labor force, not of the population. And you can see that I'm getting that mixed up even just as I say it, and I have to be very careful how I watch my words. So that's 5% of the labor force we believe at any one time is frictionally unemployed. And this is a completely rough number. People change it from year to year, but that's just a rough ballpark. So then cyclical workers are workers that are out of work due to bad macroeconomic conditions. They're out of work due to a macroeconomic cycle. So I'm just going to write cycle here, a business cycle. And so the example that comes to mind is construction workers in the housing bubble. There was no more construction, so they were cyclically unemployed due to the macroeconomic cycle, and that's the key word there. Then structurally unemployed is when a worker's skills no longer match employers' needs. And so this is something about the economy, normally a technological advancement, so I'm just going to write technology here, has made some workers' skills obsolete. So for example, let's say that there was a new coding language that came out, and that coding language made it completely obsolete for this employee to enter data all day long. So now the data just automatically updates, and that employee no longer has a job because he has been replaced by a computer. So that is structural unemployment, and we would say that this employee, the data enterer, is now structurally unemployed. And then seasonal unemployment is just when there is seasonal work and then that season ends, that person is said to be seasonally unemployed. So ski instructors in the summer, or we could also say farm hands that work during harvest, and they are unemployed in the winter, so farm hands in the winter. And what a lot of these workers do is that they actually have 2 or 3 different seasonal jobs. So a lot of ski instructors then will also work as, for example, raft guides. So they'll be ski instructors in the winter, and then when all the snow melts, all the rivers start running, so they'll go be raft guides in the summer. And then, or they could go be a farmhand in the summer. And so you could work as a farmhand in the summer and then as a ski instructor in the winter, and you'd be employed the entire time. But if you didn't do that, it would be said that you are seasonally unemployed. So lastly, I just want to do some really quick unemployment rate calculations. And first I need to define the unemployment rate. So the unemployment rate is just equal to the number of unemployed as per this definition up here over the labor force, also as per this definition up here. So the other thing that I want to talk about is the labor force participation rate. And so I'm going to write that down here. The labor force participation rate. And this is equal to the labor force over the total population. So now let's just take an imaginary country. Let's say that they're in this country, we'll call this country A. So there are 100 people. It has a population of 100. 100 is equal to the population. And there are, let's say that there are 50 people that are working as farmers. So there are 50 farmers. There are 10 people that work as, they guard the border. So 10, let's call them 10, I'll just write 10 border. And then there are 10 people who are children. And I'm just going to say that that is less than, and that's a less than sign, less than 16. And that leaves us what? We have 50, 60, 70. And then let's say that there are 10 people that are retired. And finally, I'll just scroll down a little bit. We have 10 people that are out of work and looking for it. Out of work and looking. So I just want to calculate the labor force participation rate and the unemployment rate. So we're going to start with the unemployment rate just because it's on top. And so we need to figure out the labor force first. So the labor force is everyone that is non-institutionalized civilians over 16 who are employed or actively seeking employment. So the farmers are employed, so they make it into the labor force. The 10 people that are guarding the border, they do not make it into the labor force because they are not civilians. We're going to say that they are part of the armed forces. So they are not in the labor force. The children are not in the labor force because they're under 16. The retired people are not in the labor force because they are no longer actively seeking employment. They're retired. And the 10 people that are out of work and looking for work are in the labor force because they are out of work and they're looking, and we're assuming that they're over 16 and not institutionalized. So our labor force then is 50 for the farmers plus 10 for the people that are out of work and looking, which is 60. So then our unemployment rate is just going to be, and I'll just put this up here, it's going to be the number of unemployed, which would only be these 10 people that are out of work and looking, so 10 over the labor force, which is 60. So that is 1/6, and I'm not going to go ahead and figure out what that is as a percent because I believe that you can do that on your own. And I don't have a calculator with me, which might be the real reason. So then the labor force participation rate, we have the population of 100. And so all that we need to do then is take the labor force, which we already figured out as 60, and we make that 60 over 100, and that reduces to, that would be 60%. I can do that one in my head, so we'll just leave it as that. So the labor force participation rate is 60%. In other words, 60% of the population is in the labor force. And then of everyone that is in the labor force, 1 out of 6 people are unemployed. So that should be everything you need to know about unemployment and the unemployment rate. I hope that was clear. If there's anything that wasn't, just let me know.